Hi, thank you so much for joining back on my channel. I hope you are doing well during this pandemic times, and oftentimes we wonder why God is allowing all of this to come as a mess of us and why suffering especially. But if you have to look closely, and I have to tell you that something that our life is so fragile that if not corona, it might be something else. It might be cancer, it might be a deadly fever, or it might be an accident, or it might be a financial situation. But the only constant thing that remains is God, and every time we look up to our problems, we need to understand there's a God who can actually work us and walk us through those kind of situations that we're dealing with. And I want to talk to you about one such kind of a psalm in the whole book of Psalms. It is about the 90th psalm written by Moses. It was one of the oldest psalms, but if you had to take a look why as in it is being indulged or has it been added into that list of books, or the list of psalms in those books, is this. It talks about God's sovereignty, and then it reminds about man's frailty, and finally it goes on where Moses writes about requesting how God had left his presence and request him to come back and deal with him in the future. So this is what happens. The Israelites are taken as captives, and after 430 years, with the help of Moses, started walking towards the promised land, Canaan. And when they started walking through the wilderness, they forget who had led them throughout that wilderness. They forget who God is, and then started acting according to their own desires and lustful flesh. But then what happens then is God starts to teach them a lesson. That is when Moses, out of the pandemic and out of the pain that's being taken through all the Israelite, he reminds God of whom he is and starts writing this psalm. If you look at the first two opening verses of this psalm, it's so profound that it talks about God's sovereignty. It talks about God being there from the everlasting to everlasting. Even before the foundations of earth was formed, he was there. That means you were there, God. And Moses is reminding and telling the people along with whom he's walking that even before the foundations of earth was formed, the world was formed, that God was already there, that God knew that he would protect his people. And here's the techie glitch or the catch amongst the verses, that Moses is telling that God existed even before time, and God's going to exist in present, and long after Moses is gone, or Moses goes into the presence of God, or Moses dies, God is still going to be there. That means he's reminding God that he's sovereign, and then he's walking them through that situation. And then he goes on to talk about how man has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. From the verses 3 to 12 talks clearly about man's frailty, that man has withered away. His life is so fragile that without God he can't do anything. Even though he walks through a valley of shadow of death, if God is by his side, he wouldn't fear any evil. Now this is what we need to remind ourselves when we are walking through these kind of situations, that God existed even before time, even before the foundations of earth was formed. He was there. Well before this problem came into our lifestyles, God is going to be there. Even before you actually spill words in his presence, he knows the very intentions of your heart. So he knows what exactly you're going through. Moses is kind of reminding God the same thing, that, oh Lord, if you're not with us, then we are not going to walk anywhere. And while doing this, after the first two verses, this is where it goes. The remaining 3 to verse 12, it talks about man's frailty, where Moses reminds God that without him we are nothing. So we need to remind ourselves that without God we are nothing. We might be in thick of some troubles, we might be going through some problems, but if you remind yourself that God is eternal help for you, then you will understand that only God can walk you through that situation. So Moses reminds God who he is, and he tells God that, okay God, we are nothing, we are merely dust, but you are the one who holds us together. So without you we are nothing. And finally, third thing what Moses does is Moses looks up to God for help. When you look at chapter 90 verse 12, it talks about teach us to number our days so that we might gain a heart of wisdom. After all, looking at the miracles God has done in Moses' life throughout the wilderness, after all, looking how God has led Israelites as a pillar of fire in the cloud, but still Moses actually looks up to God saying that, oh God, I might be gone from here, but these people need your presence. If they have to go to the promised land, they need you. So he's going to remind God and ask him for wisdom. He's asking him to teach him the number of days. We might not know if we are going to be here, gone away tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Don't know if someone's going to affect with what's happening around the world, or don't know when the world will end or when your life will end. But Moses reminds God the similar way. You and I need to remind God the same way, that Lord, teach us to number our days so that we might gain a heart of wisdom. It clearly says in the book of James that if anyone lacks wisdom, we need to ask God, and God will provide generously to all, because wisdom, knowledge and wealth are in his might, and he's the one who provides. When you start running into the problem, I want you to be reminded that you need to look up to the potential source who is the giver. And when you start looking up to God as the potential source, He'll be the anchor of your ship. And finally, Moses writes in the closing verses from 13 to 17 so brilliantly. He puts it, sums up so brilliantly all the problems in the wilderness that the Israelites are doing. He brings it together, he weaves it and wovens it and says, God, that, oh God, now if you don't help us, then we will be lost in this wilderness. If you don't rescue us, we will be lost in your wrath. Take away the wrath from our side and bring mercy. Even in the morning when we get up, help us to look up to you. Let your loving kindness return to us. Oftentimes we will also be troubled by many things. We fall into many sinful desires and lustful desires. But when we start accepting our flaws in front of Him, He is so faithful that He'll walk straight away to you and make sure that He'll take you from the shore side. Now, I want to remind you this, that there may be situations which are out of your control, but always remember that there's a God who is always in control. Start looking up to Him, start walking to Him, asking for help, and He'll bring His angels to guard you and guide you and protect you. Thank you so much for giving me a hearing. God bless you all.